Hey folks, it's Matt Easton here. What follows is a movie fight review. A fight featured in Avengers End Game between Hawkeye, otherwise known as Ronin, and his opponent Akihiko, which I mispronounced throughout the video, so you can laugh at that. But this is a second edit of it, which unfortunately has had to have all of the original Disney-owned footage removed from it because it got blocked when I tried to upload it to YouTube. So enjoy the video anyway, and I suggest that you search for Hawkeye sword fight, Avengers, maybe Ronin as well, and you'll find the sword fight actually on YouTube, although you won't unfortunately be able to see it on this video. But I hope that my feedback and my review will stand anyway, and you'll still be able to watch the original fight and enjoy my review of it. Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria, and here I am with another movie fight review. And this is the sword fight between Hawkeye and Akihiko in the film Avengers End Game. Of course, whilst you might think of the Avengers or Marvel movies as not necessarily containing many sword fights, in fact they kind of do, but most of them are quite fantastical. I particularly picked this one because this is more of a kind of standard sword fight between two relatively mortal, normal human beings with normal-ish weapons. Hawkeye in this fight is going under the name Ronin to disguise his identity, and of course is wearing a face mask as well, and is clearly supposed to have sort of ninja or at least heavily Japanese influenced characteristics to his dress and to his weaponry. His opponent is Akihiko, who is in this a leader of the Yakuza. Now before I go into the review, just a quick word about our sponsors, who are Raid Shadow Legends. As all of you I'm sure are aware, Raid Shadow Legends is a massively popular turn-based fantasy combat game. Raid is free to play, free to download. Use my links below to download Raid yourself to your mobile phone or PC. It's a turn-based strategy fighting game, so you can literally pick your champions, you can modify them, customize them, upgrade them, and then you can pick your team as well depending on who your opponents are, what type of mission you're doing. So it's actually quite tactical. Bear in mind also that some of your characters help other characters do certain things. Particularly I find that healing characteristics are very, very good to have at least in one of your characters, but you don't need it necessarily in multiples of them. So Raid has 16 different factions, including things like orcs, dwarves, dark elves, and so on. If you go to the index screen, you can find all of the factions there, and they've all got lots of unique characters. So if we go into the index screen down here, you can see all of the different things here. We've got Bannerlords, High Elves, Sacred Order, Barbarians, absolutely loads of stuff. Now, my favourites probably are the Knight Revenant. They tend to have lots of armour. You see that I've got quite a few rare level characters, and you can see that they go up rare, epic, legendary. I have only got 2 epic level characters, but that's not bad, that's pretty good. I don't have any legendaries yet, but I really like, if we have a look in here, Kaitis, I've shown in previous videos. I like him because his armour just looks really, really badass. And it's black and yellow, so that's club colours for Schola Gladiatoria. I've also got this guy who I haven't actually, the Necro Hunter. I know he's good, but I haven't really developed him, haven't really used him much yet. Raid just released a huge champion update, tweaking and rebalancing over 20 different champions to make PvP arena battles even more competitive. And if that's not enough, the Forge has just come out, so now you can save time and start crafting top quality artifacts and competing right away. So go to the video description below, click on the special links there, and if you're a new player, you'll get 50,000 silver, 50 gems, 1 energy refill, 1 clan boss key, and 5 mystery shards, plus 1 day XP booster and 1 free champion, the Hex Weaver. This offer's only available for the next 30 days and only for new players. You can find me online and come and battle me. I operate under the name Captain Context, of course. All this treasure will be waiting for you just up here in this inbox, which looks like a treasure chest. So thanks for sticking with us. Now into the fight review. So the fight between Ronin or Hawkeye and Akihiko is fundamentally a straightforward sword fight, in this case involving katanas. Now, some of you may have noticed that Hawkeye's katana is not a traditional normal katana, but is very clearly based on the Japanese type of sword design. But I actually quite like the fact that they've gone with something a bit more sort of off the wall, a bit futuristic. I think if he'd just been using a standard standard traditional katana, then this actually would have looked out of place with his costume and with his normal weaponry and what we know about the character. We know he likes tech. We know that he's got access to high tech. He's always used it even before he knew Tony Stark. And the sword that he's using is fundamentally, sort of in the way you use it, it is basically a katana, but you'll notice that it's got these sections cut out of what would normally be the groove or fuller at the back, bohi, and the fact that these are taken out doesn't really make any mechanical difference to how the sword works. It's just distributing the metal, the steel, in a different way. But also the grip is somewhat different, and the guard and this kind of thing. But I like the fact that fundamentally it's still recognisably a katana, but they've made it fit with his character. In contrast, Akihiko uses a traditional katana and is a traditional movie version of a Yakuza leader who, despite the fact all his henchmen have got firearms, and he doesn't, he has a sword, because that is something which movies, everything from Kill Bill to Marvel, like to fixate on, is that for some reason they think that the Japanese mafia are all armed with swords. Now, first up, we have to notice, of course, that within the context of this sword fight, we see right from the beginning that Hawkeye, or Ronin, is fantastic at dodging the fire, the bullets coming from fully automatic weapons which are being aimed at him. Now, either these Yakuza henchmen are terrible shots, or I think what we're supposed to assume is that he has fantastic acrobatic and dodging abilities, which we have seen in the other movies. So his ability to move around a space and avoid missiles thrown or shot at him is amazing, which means that Akihiko, frankly, doesn't stand an awful chance. Swing! Oh no, wait. That doesn't make a swing. Why is it that swords in movies always have to make a swing? Well, we know it's for a way of telling the audience without necessarily spelling it out in words. The sword has been drawn, it's to give tension. But the simple fact is that swords, especially katanas actually, don't make any swing when they come out of a wooden saya or scabbard. And swing again! We even see that Ronin's sword, Hawkeye's sword, comes out of a plastic or kydex, I presume, sheath or scabbard, and that also makes the same type of swing. Isn't that funny? The exact same type of swing out of completely different materials. It's almost like it's just an added sound effect. Interesting to note, reversed grip. So reversed grip and left-handed. Well, we know that Hawkeye, Clint Barton, certainly Jeremy Renner, the actor, seems to be left-handed, and we see this throughout the movie, in fact. So he is left-handed. Otherwise, that might be something to note if he wasn't supposed to be left-handed, but he is supposedly in this version left-handed. And reverse grip. Now, reverse grip, not to say it didn't happen historically in Japanese or European or any other martial arts. It did, and I've made various videos about this in the past. It absolutely did happen, but usually, it has to be said, certainly in Europe, it was usually for stabbing, not for cutting. It is beloved of Hollywood, and I'm not exactly sure why, but everything from kind of like Riddick, Chronicles of Riddick, through everything involving katanas, and even occasionally with European swords, even in things like Game of Thrones, we occasionally see it. Even if we go all the way back to Conan the Barbarian, there's one point at which Arnie does use his two-handed sword in a reverse grip. So it is something that is beloved of fight choreographers, and I'm not entirely sure why. It is not a very effective way to cut or to parry. It is weak in the cut and it is weak in the parry. Does it give any real advantages? Not really, no. Possibly stabbing, because stabbing you can use it like a large dagger at very close range, and this is how we see it in medieval manuscripts being used occasionally. But in cutting and in guarding, so in parrying or defending yourself, it's quite a weak grip. But just to reiterate, not to say it never happened, it's just not normal, and it just appears way too much in movies, I'm afraid. A sidestep and a deflect, perfectly nice. The sparks are an added quality. Do you get sparks when swords hit each other? Yes, occasionally. I've literally seen it from my own swords when I've been training people and when I've been sparring. So occasionally when steel hits steel, you do get sparks, absolutely. So I kind of like that. Yeah, good movement, Nice little added detail of the sparks. It's not fantasy, it is something that can happen. Now that block with the reverse grip, we can almost see here how weak that is. It's a very, very weak position because your arm muscles are just not designed in a way to be able to oppose a lot of force that way, whereas they are designed to oppose quite a lot of force that way. So it's a very, very weak block or guard or parry. I really like the use of the left hand there to push away. This is something we see in fencing treatises and in martial arts manuals from Asia and Europe. The use of the left hand against the opponent's weapon can be against their blade. You can push it away, you can push the flat away, push the back away, you can command, you can grab, but equally pushing of any part of the opponent's obviously hand or arm, but also the hilt, the grip. So great use of the left hand there. This is good. This is good historical, martially valid swordsmanship. Oh, that duck and slash. Duck and slash is very, very risky in a real fight because you've got nothing between you and the opponent's sword apart from your timing. We do know that Hawkeye or Ronin is fantastic at evasion and dodging, so we can add that to it and it makes it safer by virtue of that. But just so that you know, in a normal sword fight, that's highly, highly risky to just rely on dodging a sword blow and attacking in the same time. But, you know, it's high risk, high benefit. It means that you can hit the opponent in the exact same time that they're trying to hit you and failing. It has to be said, within this fight choreography, that technique is assisted by the fact that Akihiko actually aims over the top of Clint's head. And this is typical of fight choreography and where actors are running through the moves. The actor who plays Akihiko knows that he's not really trying to hit Clint in the head, hit Hawkeye in the head, so he aims over the head. And unfortunately, due to the camera angles, it's a bit obvious in this exchange that the blow was aimed too high and over the actor's head. Just a minor detail here, but you can really see in a couple of these shots how the blades that they're using are not sharp steel blades like this, but they seem to be probably aluminium or aluminum if you're American, thick, fat-edged blades. And I don't want to ruin your viewing pleasure of modern movie fights, but most modern movie fights don't use steel weapons except for close-ups like this, where they're in the camera. They tend to, obviously they're blunt weapons, they're not sharp, they don't have a fine edge. And you'll notice that if I move this sword around, you can't see a reflection along the edge, because the edge is sharp. Unfortunately, if you look in movies, you can very often see a bright white line. You can see this in Lord of the Rings quite often. You can see a bright white line going up the front cutting edge of the sword because it's flat or rounded, it's blunt. And unfortunately, in some movies, they use particularly thick because they're using aluminum, so they're quite fat because aluminium is lighter than steel. So they're quite fat for safety and also to make them the right size, make them look like a real sword. And so unfortunately you get a lot of reflection along the edges and you can really see that the blades are blunts and they don't really, to those who are very familiar with sharp swords, you can kind of spot them a mile off. They don't look like real sharp swords, unfortunately. But anyway, a minor detail. Now that was a very, very slow deflect there between Akihiko and Hawkeye, and really Akihiko had so many chances to do things during that slow pushover, that kind of deflection. And I talk about this a lot in movies where for dramatic effect people cross swords and then they have a dialogue, or they just kind of push away, they do something quite simplistic like this, or they quit the bind, which is in this moment you're safe because your sword's bound against your opponent's blade and in front of you, and then they just cut somewhere else and there's nothing to stop the opponent's blade hitting them. In fact, there are loads and loads of techniques in the martial arts treatises and manuals from history that show us what you can do in this time, coming around to hit with the back end of the sword, or using the left hand to grab or even punch or push or grapple or wrestle, disarms, taking the sword off the other person through various different ways you can do this. So there's so many cool techniques they could put in these bits, but fight choreography for the last 100 years, since movies began basically, has had this as a trope basically, where you come into a bind and then there's a kind of really quite simplistic push. And it's not really realistic to real swordsmanship or real martial arts. But anyway, just to be aware that sort of push is not something you'd ever really see in a real sword fight. But I guess it works in this particular fight from a narrative and from a pacing point of view, because we have quite short spouts of flurries of activity, and it's quite nice, I suppose, to have this slightly calmer, slower bit in the middle that still has tension but isn't so much of a flurry of activity. So from an artistic point of view, I understand why they do it. Nice use by Akihiko there of the left hand to command. I really like that. That's good technique. Absolutely something that we see in historical martial arts from Asia or Europe. Again, Hawkeye or Ronin, very nice use of a jab there. It's the sort of thing, I won't say it's out of one particular treatise, but it's the sort of thing that we see in historical martial arts. It's plausible, I like it, it adds variety to the fight, it's classy, it's a good move. Akihiko, really interesting use of the left hand there to push away, bat away the point. I really like that, and actually that's something you don't see very often in movie sword fights. Is the fact is sharp blades cut and thrust, but the fact is that you can, this is a sharp blade, you can absolutely slap them on the back or the flat. If you're wearing certain types of clothing or of armour, you can hit them on the edge as well. And the fact is that if someone's holding a weapon out in front of you, one way to get it out of the way is to smack the thing away. The other way is to grab it as well. He doesn't grab it in this case, but I've seen in sparring matches many times when a person holds the sword out in front, the other person pretends to go and grab it. And I have seen them grab it as well, but they pretend to go and grab it. And what does the effect that have? That means the person holding a sword out pulls it back because they don't want their weapon to be grabbed. So actually it doesn't just have the literal purpose of batting or grabbing the opponent's sword. It might make them just move it out of the way and get it out of your face. So really good martial technique. If someone's holding a weapon in front of your face, like interfere with that weapon in your face with your left hand, but you've still got your weapon in your right hand. So in the time that you're doing that, it's a bit like having a shield or a buckler. In the time that you're doing that, as they move their weapon away or try and avoid you grabbing or slapping or whatever, you can also hit as well. So good martial technique. Ronin or Hawkeye does a really nice beat onto the back of Akihito's blade there, dominating the high line, and I really like that because that's again the sort of thing that we see in historic martial arts, and it makes martial sense because you're dominating this high line where due to geometry and biology, this is the area of most importance for the upper body and head and arms. If you can dominate that line by beating the opponent's sword down whilst your sword remains above, then that's good. That's a good thing. So I like that. Again, it shows variety in the fight and good technique. Okay, so this draw through slash is, I've talked about it in so many videos. It's super common in movie and stage fights for a number of reasons. One, because it means you don't have to show a wound because the person can crease over it. Two, because it's safe for the actors to do. It's into the person's sort of belly area, so it's soft and they can fold into it. It looks dramatic and finishing, I guess, because it's into the person's torso. So there's all sorts of reasons why they love doing this in stage choreography. However, martially, this type of move isn't very common for a number of reasons. Firstly, if you want to successfully cut or slash, whether it's a chop or a draw cut or a push cut, doesn't make any difference. It is easier to do so against small surfaces which have hard things underneath them, like bone. So chopping into an arm is relatively simple. Chopping into a belly is relatively difficult because a belly is soft and absorbent and a large surface area. So the force is spread over a large surface area. There's also lots of baggy clothing over a belly, not so much it's tighter clothing over something like an arm or a shoulder or a head or a neck or a leg. So even aiming at a hip would be easier because under the hip is bone and the fabric stretches over there in a slightly more tight way. So cutting a belly, certainly with someone with clothes on, is relatively difficult to perform a successful wounding cut. And any of you can try this if you own a sharp sword. You could even do this with a sharp kitchen knife. You try and slash through something which is taut and hard. Now you try and slash through something which is soft and has a moving fabric over the top of it. Very difficult. Good luck with that. So I understand why they do it, but it's used in so many, TV fights, movie fights, stage fights, for the reasons that stage choreography want to use it, not because it's something that we see an awful lot in actual historical records of fights with swords or similar weapons, or because it makes an awful lot of martial sense. And finally, there's one reason why You often want to avoid doing this move. By coming low and going across the belly, you leave everything above here, everything above your blade, completely uncovered. When you cut someone in the shoulder or neck, your sword is in front of your vital target. So as well as hitting them, you have a bar of steel in front of you protecting you. When you go down to their belly, you have nothing protecting your vital targets up here. So you could hit them in the belly, and at the same time, maybe even just as a flinch reaction, they'll hit you in the head. And actually, for the aforementioned reasons, because it's quite hard to wound through clothes into someone's belly, you're going to come off worse. So it is bad sense martially. It's a bad idea to do it, but I understand why movie fight directors use it. Akihiko using a nice half-swording position there again. I do love the use of the left hands that they've done in this fight, both for commanding the opponents, hitting the opponents, but also on their own weapons as well. It gives more diversity to their sword use. It shows that the fight director actually knows quite a lot of technique and knows a lot of martial arts stuff. Yeah, so great. I love it. Okay, so here we come in with the final throat slash, and I've got to say I like it, and I think, you know, of all of the wounds that we could have gone for that would finish this person, that's a convincing one. There's no clothing there. It was nicely set up. But I've got one issue, and this is not the sort of issue that you'll normally see on my channel, because it's not to do with the martial validity of it, which I think's fine. My problem with this scene is that it's not very clear. So it's more of a cinematographic, a kind of sort of filming issue, or editing issue perhaps. It might be editing more than filming actually, because I'm sure they shot this from several different cameras. I actually think this is quite sloppy, and given that this is quite a cool fight, it's quite a short fight, but it's been well done and well thought out. There's a lot of stuff in this fight, despite the fact that it's quite short. So what I think is disappointing is this really important exchange, probably, well, the most important exchange in the whole fight, is kind of sloppily filmed in my opinion, and it should have been clearer what exactly happened in what order and how that throat slash came in. I wonder if their intention was to deliberately make it look confused and a flurry, and then to reveal the throat slash, like the big reveal, like, bum, 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 what's going on? Wow, he's done it. And I wonder if that was their intention, which makes sense, but I don't think it quite worked. So there we go. It's more of an artistic criticism, but martially, yeah, it's all good. Why did he have to stab him? He's dying from presumably arterial bleed from the neck. He ain't gonna live long, and presumably, Clint thinks this guy's a real baddie. He's a leader of Yakuza. He's overseen the death of hundreds or thousands of people. And he specifically, Hawkeye, is out there hunting these people down because he thinks that they don't deserve to have survived the snap, as it's called. So he thinks this guy deserves to die, but why kill him? Maybe it's mercy, maybe it's humanity. And I think this is more of an interesting question for characterization and people who know about the character and are into the stories. I'd be interested to hear your views. Why do you think that the director or the fight choreographer decided to have him finish him off with a stab? Was it to make him look more brutal? Or was it to make him look more merciful? And I can kind of see an argument for either way, because it's kind of putting him out of his misery and killing him quicker, which is merciful. But at the same time, it looks sort of brutal. So is it showing that Hawkeye has strayed so far from the sort of more, you know, from the good guy, I guess, that we've grown to know and love, despite the fact he started out basically as a government assassin. We shouldn't forget that. Anyway, so I'd be interested to hear your views about why did they put that final stab in. Finally, the cleaning of the blood off the blade. This is a little bit problematic from mechanical purposes, partly because of the sword that Ronin or Hawkeye is using, and partly because of how he does the wipe. So imagine you have just, you've slashed someone about in the belly, in the throat, and you've stabbed them. So you're going to have, if you have blood on your blade at all, and you might not have much, because I have to say, having done lots of test cutting, including on meat, you're not necessarily left with much blood on the blade, because when you pass through something due to the friction of the material, it tends to pull the liquid off the blade as you go through. But anyway, that's a fairly morbid thing to note. But you imagine you've got any blood on your blade. The blood is likely to be mostly along the edge, the point, and maybe in the groove or fuller. Now this is where Hawkeye's sword is problematic, because he doesn't have a groove or filler at the back of the blade, he has holes, and those holes are going to collect moisture and blood, and when you wipe like this, it's not going to take any of the blood out of those holes. You're still going to be left with blood in the holes. And then he's going to put it into his scabbard, and you're going to have dried, congealed blood inside those holes. So it's a bad blade design from that point of view. It's also a redundant cleaning process from that point of view. But lastly, by doing this, you don't get any blood off the edge or the point, do you? So look, it's completely the wrong side. So I don't really know if there was any point to that at all. I just want to finish off by saying that I actually think this was a really good fight. There's some really big variety of martial technique in there. It was quite nicely filmed. It was a bit too short. I would have liked it to be a bit longer, but there's some really, really good stuff in there. And I think particularly for a Marvel movie, which is usually so fantastical and huge, this was actually quite pedestrian, but in a nice pedestrian way. These were two mortal people fighting with basically simple swords in simple sword fighting, using some traditional techniques as well as some less traditional, more sort of movie fight techniques. But there was some traditional martial arts in there, and I really, really liked it. I hope you've enjoyed watching this movie fight review. If you haven't seen my others, or haven't seen all of them, I've got plenty of others on my playlist. Give us a like and a subscribe, and I will see you back again on the channel for other videos involving weapons and things like this really, really soon. Cheers for watching, folks.